In one of the universes, a man was lucky enough to be reborn after being deprived of his life into his favorite character, Han Shi-ha, who was not very successful. Han Shi-ha was very frustrated because by characteristics, he was a neutrally evil hero who had no special skills. His thoughts were interrupted by people coming towards him, and as soon as they got closer, he immediately realized that it was the Dark Mage's outhouse. Han Shi-ha was a mage, but he was mostly avoided at the academy because he lacked any special or secret skills. When the troubled times came, the Dark Mage Wing let many through because dark mages of any level and rank were considered useful. Han Shi-ha was very happy that the guards considered him a disciple of Angel Academy and agreed to let him pass on. The attendant asked Han Shi-ha if he was familiar with carrying out the procedure for Dark Mage Wing to join their squad. Han Shi-ha was familiar with this procedure and realized that once he took the oath, he would never be able to leave the squad again. He remembered that very soon, this Dark Mage Wing would become the most famous organization of villains, consisting of different squads. However, then all the squads will be taken away by the main characters of the current version, and Han Shi-ha started to think how he can leave the place. The system notifies the current version to synchronize with Han Shi-ha's thoughts and recommended him to run away from the Dark Mage. The attendant said he heard strange noises coming from the basement and asked the new recruit, Han Shi-ha, to wait for him on the spot. Han Shi-ha realized that he had a chance to escape, so he started running as hard as he could, but he couldn't identify the floor he was on. When Han Shi-ha saw the rays of light, he was glad that he was on the right path and was not far from the exit, but he heard voices. Hiding behind a column, he saw that the two mage guards had already started looking for him, realizing that the young man had left the third floor and moved on. The Dark Mages reasoned that according to their information, the young man was from the Ardal Academy, so he was most likely a spy. After waiting for the mages to leave the floor, Han Shi-ha immediately ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge at all. Han Shi-ha decided not to despair and try to use the memories of the hero in whose body he found himself. Han Shi-ha was born a mage, but had no talent for light magic at all, so he didn't know how to use his large mana reserve. Then he thought that he should learn to control the flow of mana accumulated over a long period of time to manage it. Accumulating mana not used for years on his fingertips, Han Shi-ha directed it towards the castle to destroy it. After a few tries, he realized that he was starting to succeed, but it was still too difficult and it was taking a lot of physical strength in addition to mana. Suddenly he heard footsteps approaching and felt someone growling behind him, so afraid he decided to turn around. However, there was a lizard that was a baby dragon and looked quite friendly to humans. Han Shi-ha told the baby dragon that unfortunately he couldn't take him with him because he wasn't doing so well himself. The baby dragon became very sad and began to cry loudly, and Han Shi-ha was afraid that they would be detected by the noise they were making. Realizing that he couldn't take the baby and be responsible for it, Han Shi-ha thought that perhaps the power of this dragon could be used. The system notified that their characteristics had been synchronized and he could tame the suspicious cub to enhance his characteristics. Han Shi-ha thought that he would need to activate his past life memories because he didn't quite understand how to tame the baby dragon. Remembering his past skills, he decided to try and tap into the baby dragon's trust level so that he would obey only him. As soon as he applied the trust technique, the system immediately notified that the baby dragon had been tamed and tamed. Han Shi-ha thought that even though he was able to tame the baby dragon, he still didn't understand how to use its power. Then he decided to order the dragon to open the lock, and the baby dragon's eyes immediately lit up, and he headed towards the lock that held back the doors. Han Shi-ha was very surprised that such a small dragon was able to break the rusty old lock in a few seconds. However, as soon as Han Shi-ha praised the dragon for its work, he heard footsteps approaching and became very worried. He was very upset because everything was going very well, and he had not expected that the Dark Mages would be able to detect him again. The Dark Mage guards were already very close and rejoiced that they were able to detect a spy in their territory. Han Shi-ha remembered that the first class at the academy taught martial arts techniques that allowed him to conceal his location. So, trying to remain calm, he calmed his breathing and accumulating mana at his fingertips, began to imagine the fog filling the space. Han Shi-ha tried his best to shroud the space with fog, so that he and the dragon could take a chance and escape from pursuit. There was no limit to his joy when he realized that he had succeeded and the opponents were indeed enveloped in a thick fog that hid him from them. Realizing that he and the dragon didn't have much time, they realized it was time to run and headed for the door, but suddenly someone grabbed them from behind. A large magical hand grabbed Han Shi-ha, and he realized that he couldn't resist because it was becoming difficult for him to breathe. Continuing to hold his hand with the spell, the Dark Mage said that resistance was now futile because the spy had already been caught. Han Shaha realized that he couldn't see his opponent because of his own fog, and his last hope was the baby dragon. After apologizing to him, Han Shiha asked the dragon to cooperate and help if he wanted to continue the journey with him in the future. The baby dragon headed towards his opponent without a second thought and immediately directed his fiery breath with tongues of flame at him. After that, the dark magic began to dissipate, and Han Shiha was able to breathe again, which pleased him greatly in this situation. He looked at the little dragon and couldn't believe that it actually managed to attack opponents strong enough. After praising the dragon for its work, Han Shiha was very surprised that he now owed his life to such a small creature. After getting out of the cave, Han Shaha was very tired because around him was a real desert that was covered by the scorching sun. Suddenly, he saw a horse-drawn carriage in the distance, and the coachman who drove the carriage looked like a completely ordinary man. Han Shaha immediately ran toward the wagon to ask for help and a ride to the nearest village. The coachman looked at the young man in a dark robe in this heat and asked if he had the cash to pay the fare. Han Shaha showed the gold card that confirmed that he was a disciple sponsored by the Ardell Academy and hoped that the coachman would give his consent. The coachman agreed to accept this form of payment and asked the passenger to get on the wagon and then asked where exactly they were going. Han Shiha hesitated because he realized that the dark magicians would still pursue him so that he wouldn't be able to tell information about them. Realizing that many were beginning to hunt him, he asked the coachman to take him to the safest place, Ardell Academy. Meanwhile, at Selin Academy, the assistant professor of the second year of the academy was walking through the academy ground. She realized that their academy was considered a very prestigious place because even the students' uniforms were of very high quality and beautiful. When Selin saw a rather poor wagon approaching such a prestigious and expensive academy, she was horrified. Seeing the student who was shaking the dust off his robe, Selin practically fainted with horror that there was such a student in such an academy. Han Shiha tried not to pay attention to anyone and fixed his clothes and headed towards the main building of the academy. Selin wondered who could do such a thing to the honor of the academy right on the first day of the school term. Taking a closer look, she realized that it was Han Shiha, who was the most difficult disciple on the verge of failure due to the lack of use of abilities. Han Shiha walked over to Selin and thought about who she might be at the academy and clarified if he was late for class. Selin thought that she didn't want to waste her time on him because he was on the verge of dropping out this semester. She also remembered that she had heard talk of the young man performing strange magical rituals, so she decided not to mess with him. Therefore, she decided to pat Han Shaha on the shoulder and give a recommendation to hurry up for the upcoming class. Han Shiha smiled and promised the teacher to try to never be late like this again, and to be more attentive. Selin agreed with him and thought about the fact that this student had been at the academy for 2 years and still didn't know what anyone's name was. As Han Shiha sat down at his desk, he realized that all the students around him were actively discussing what a gloomy and unskilled student he was. The students were mostly discussing their surprise that Han Shiha still hadn't been expelled and was already in his second year at the academy. They speculated about the possible ways his parents or some of his teachers had influenced him not to be expelled so far. Han Shiha listened to their conversation and thought about how he would survive the new affair he had to find himself. He realized that according to the story, his hero villain would have to take his life in the first chapter by the main character. Since he didn't know who exactly would do it and why, he decided to lead a quiet life and not cross anyone's path. The history parents were also ready to give up on their son, so he decided to make things right and successfully graduate from Ardell Academy. Han Shiha had already imagined how after graduating from the academy, he would become a highly sought-after specialist with a high salary. He was very serious about living the usual quiet life of a successful student and avoiding all kinds of conflict situations. Han Shiha's thoughts were interrupted by a professor who entered the classroom and greeted the students, informing them that he would be their class teacher. Professor Grint was part of the Department of Magic and was responsible for the grades and performance of all second-year students at the academy. All the students began to whisper because they knew that Professor Grint's exams were very difficult and it would not be easy to pass. Professor Grint asked everyone to organize silence and said that he was already seeing capable students who had successfully completed their first year of study. Han Shiha thought that he was going to have a very difficult period of study with such a strict and fair professor. He realized that training at the academy lasted 6 years, and the students were in constant competition with each other for the right to train. Statistically speaking, only 1/10 of the students graduated from Ardell Academy with any significant result. Ahan Shah realized that it would be very difficult for him, and he was thinking about how to compete with the main outstanding characters in this scenario. He understood that the main plot required him to practice dark magic, but it was completely the wrong choice when leading a quiet life. His thoughts were interrupted by Professor Green, who informed him that from the second year, students without abilities would finally be expelled. After that, the professor said that he would announce the list of entrance tests for the rightful enrollment in the second year of study at the academy. When magic was applied, a notification appeared in front of each student to choose 3 subjects for the written and oral exam. Han Shiha was amazed at this level of magic, but was surprised that he could choose any 3 subjects to take the exam. He was already anticipating the taste of victory, thinking about which 3 subjects he should choose, in which he was sure to excel and pass successfully. However, Professor Green said that they would take turns choosing the subjects, and the turn would be determined by lot. Han Shiha was terrified that he would have to rely on the luck of the draw, plus he had spent almost a year getting out of the Black Magician's lair. To the great surprise of all the students, Professor Green took out the first balloon and announced that the first student to choose a subject would be Han Shiha. Han Shiha couldn't believe his luck and realized that he had been saved because he would only have to choose easy subjects to pass the exam. Looking through the list of items, he immediately discarded the ones that were practical because he didn't possess mana in full strength yet. Flipping through the list of subjects, he didn't understand why the names were so complicated and decided to settle on hydrology and ritual. The other students were very surprised that Han Shiha had chosen the most difficult of the theoretical subjects as his first subject. Han Shiha decided to ignore his classmates' discussions and try to pick 2 more subjects faster and just sit at his desk. After selecting their subjects, students went to the library to study hard and prepare for their exam. Han Shiha thought that it would be easier for him to pass the exam because in his past life he was a veterinarian and the subjects were similar to his subject. He understood that in the subject of hydrology, the main source of magic was water, which meant he would be able to apply the mathematical formulas he already knew. The next subject was the anatomy of monsters and the stylistics of their behavior, and Han Shiha decided to apply to the study of his new baby dragon. Seeing that the dragon was starting to make noise, he decided to leave the library building so as not to arouse the suspicion of the other student. Because the students started discussing how Han Shiha, who had no basic skills, was able to tame an entire dragon. After a little thought, Han Shiha went to the underground training arena, where the dragon could realize its full potential. As he approached the training hall, he asked for 1 ticket so he could train his dragon. The employee was very surprised that such a very small dragon, which had just been born, was planned to be trained. Han Shiha decided to ignore the employee's musings and asked for a ticket in his name and the dragon's name. Looking at the dragon, he asked what his name was, but the dragon was engrossed in its own business and did not respond to him at all. Then Han Shiha began to think about what name to give the dragon, and the dragon showed by his appearance that he wanted a cool name that everyone would know. Han Shiha suggested the name Basilisk, and the dragon showed that he liked it very much. The staff member recorded Han Shiha and Basilisk and reminded them that there could be no more than 2 people in the arena, and right now, there was 1 student already practicing there. She then pointed to a wall with different types of implements and offered to rent one for the student to choose from. Han Shiha realized that the selection was very scarce, but he had absolutely no time to complain about it because it was already free. A staff member opened the first and second gates to transfer Han Shiha and Basilisk into the training arena. Once inside, Han Shiha was surprised that everything looked very realistic and interesting, including the trees and sunlight. Through the vines, they saw cubic slimes that were level 1 monsters and looked even very cute. Han Shiha informed Basilisk that those cute jelly-like things were monsters and they should do some good damage to them. He asked the dragon to go first and deal with the monsters while he watched from behind the bushes. To his surprise, the dragon's dragon instincts quickly awoke and he was quite confident on the battlefield. Realizing that the Basilisk was doing well in battle, Han Shiha realized that he should now try and take part in the battle himself. Suddenly, he heard one of the jelly monsters heading in his direction and immediately instinctively put up a shield for protection. Looking ahead, he realized that the low-level monsters were too many, and he would absolutely not be able to deal with them alone. Therefore, he immediately summoned the Basilisk and directed it towards the monster cubes so that the dragon could train its power. The Basilisk immediately used a fiery flame with its tongues to take the lives of all the cubes that looked like irregular colored jelly. Han Shiha was very pleased with this ability of the Basilisk and praised him for his work and informed him that they could continue to move forward. After a while, Han Shiha and Basilisk were very tired of facing the monster, and he realized that he should reward Basilisk with a delicious meal. His thoughts were interrupted by shouting, and Han Shiha looked out to see what had happened and saw another disciple who couldn't handle the pet. When he looked closely, he saw a girl, and Han Shiha wondered who she was because he hadn't seen her on his stream before. He decided to observe how the student coped with her pet, which was completely disobeying her and even growled. Han Shiha immediately determined that the pet was a hellhound dog that needed a completely different approach to obey. The apprentice was completely unable to cope with her pet, who at one point decided to just run off on her own, ignoring orders. She was very angry and didn't understand why her own dog was disobeying his owner and decided to chase him down to scold him again. Catching up with her dog, she was very surprised that he obediently obeyed the other student's commands and looked very content and affectionate. As the student came closer, she was even more surprised because she realized that it was the sophomore Han Shiha. Han Shiha told the student that he had seen this dog before, and to make him obedient, he should be treated differently. The student was very surprised, especially when Han Shiha said that the dog senses her anger. That's why it's showing anxiety. She didn't understand why Han Shiha, who was the least successful student, was still giving her advice on how to handle the pet. Adela, on the other hand, was a mage who had never fallen below 3rd place in the overall rankings of the most prestigious art academy in the entire empire. However, due to the entrance test, Adela got the weakest basic taming skill, so she came to train. Adela recalled that Han Shiha could not be an opponent for her at all, because he was unable to tame even a weak monster in class. She knew that the apprentice was possessed by dark magic, and he always indulged in pity during dark days. But seeing her dog being thrilled by Han Shiha's actions, Adela didn't understand at all what was going on, and how such a thing was possible. Adela didn't understand how Han Shiha was able to tame her hellhound in a few seconds, since he had absolutely no tamer skill. Han Shiha told Adela that her dog had already calmed down a bit, and she could pick him up and continue practicing and training. Taking her dog in her arms, Adela didn't, though, thank Han Shiha for his help and advice on taming her pet. Han Shiha decided to wonder why Adela had decided to choose such a rather difficult pet to tame for the first time. Adela replied that she chose him because he was a challenging monster, and she would be able to score higher on the exam. To Adela's surprise, Han Shiha replied that he understood her because he originally thought she just liked to roll around in the mud and chase after him. She didn't understand why he spoke to her as an equal and how he had a whole tamed dragon in only his 2nd year. Adela looked at him and thought about the fact that the Han Shiha she knew was completely different, and she thought it was strange. She decided to go after Han Shiha to get a couple tips on managing her dog to get points in the exam. Seeing the opponents ahead, Adela said that this is a training field, so it is enough to strike just one blow to win. Han Shiha watched Adela's actions in the battle and realized that she had a very tough approach to the task at hand. At some point, Adela turned around and realized that very near her was the monster that Han Shiha had destroyed, and she hadn't even noticed it. Han Shiha reported that this low-level monster was able to run behind him, so he decided to assist her in the confrontation. Adela had no desire to admit her mistake, so she said that she knew where the monster ran, just didn't have time to react. Han Shiha smiled and motioned for Basilisk to follow him further inside the training arena. Adela was very surprised because Han Shiha's marksmanship was not at the level of a beginner. Suddenly, everything around them began to drown in the darkness of the dark magic of a more serious monster, and Han Shiha asked if there had always been such a trap. Adela was a little scared, but tried not to show her fear, and replied that she didn't know if there were such traps in the training arena. The students began to look around carefully to see where exactly such magic was coming from and what level their opponent was. The academy principal, watching the students, realized that there was some mistake in the beginner's dungeon spell. The director realized that things were bad, because Han Shiha was completely useless and had no chance of survival. He knew that allowing a mistake in a spell would automatically make the monsters abnormally strong for that level of dungeon. The director convened the board to quickly resolve the problem and realized that they should be very well prepared. Adela, her hound dog Basilisk, and Han Shiha prepared to defend themselves and got into defensive positions to monitor the situation. Han Shiha realized that Adele was weak in taming, but very strong in magic, so they decided to divide their positions according to skill. Analyzing Adela's actions, he realized that she was an earth maid and didn't understand why she even came to the taming training field. As Han Shiha thought back, he realized that Adela seemed much kinder than the character's story indicated. Adela didn't understand why Han Shiha was muttering to himself instead of confronting the monsters, and he replied that he was just calculating time. Hanshiha was very surprised that they had been in the arena for about 3 hours and still hadn't received any news, which meant they were trapped. Adela replied that it had only been 30 minutes outside and it was done so specifically so that the students could get more practice. Hanshiha said that in order for them to get help outside, they would have to hold out for about a couple more hours, and Adela didn't understand why he was saying that. He asked Adela to buy some time and headed towards the depths of the forest himself, and Adela didn't realize what he had come up with and was about to do. Adela begged him to stop and help her with such strong monsters, but Hanshiha didn't listen to her and moved forward. A little later, Adela smiled and said she would do her best, but if he didn't return before she ran out of mana, she would hurt him herself. Hanshiha smiled and thought that Adela was actually much kinder than everyone said she was. He recalled that in the original story, there was also an episode with a dungeon trap, and Hanshiha used all the skills, but still failed the test. When Hanshiha came to the berry and flower bush, he asked the basilisk to help him and bring all the twigs he could see. The basilisk immediately went to gather twigs, and Hanshiha thought that his character had already used this method, but decided to change it a bit. Meanwhile, Adela was already on edge because she couldn't use magic anymore, and was thinking about when Hanshiha would return. Hanshiha built a barricade of twigs that the basilisk had brought and began to call out to Adela to go inside it. Adela didn't understand how a barricade of branches could help them against slug monsters that regenerated very quickly. Hanshiha realized that in the original, his character had missed out on fire and magic control, and now he had access to those abilities. So to begin with, using magic, he began to create an arrow that split into several arrows at once. After Hanshiha asked the basilisk to add fire magic to the arrows to enhance the degree and quality of damage dealt to monsters. The basilisk immediately synchronized its powers with Hanshiha and began to apply streams of fire magic, mixing them with arrows. Hanshiha was trying very hard to control the fire magic process to cover all the monsters with abnormal power at once with one strike. Hiding from the bright light and heat from the flames, Adela was very surprised that Hanshiha had such magic because everyone thought he was useless. Hanshiha said that they had nothing to fear now because the barricade was made of fireproof branches and they should wait for help. Adele didn't understand why Hanshiha had decided to save her, since children from noble families didn't usually care for commoners. She said she was a little grateful to Hanshiha for saving her because now she was grateful for her life. Hanshiha turned to her and said that he was glad she was grateful because he wanted to ask her to do him a favor. Adele understood that the favor might not be easy, so she said she was willing to perform it if she could. However, to her great surprise, Hanshiha said that he really asked her not to tell anyone about what happened during the training session. Hanshiha added that he asked her to keep quiet about the fact that he tamed her dog, built a barricade of vines, and caught the slimes with one punch. He asked her to keep everything she saw during the training session a secret and not to tell anyone about how he handled everything alone. Adele didn't understand why he wanted to keep his success a secret from everyone, and she thought it was all too strange. Meanwhile, Hanshiha and Basilisk were looking at the slime cores that were left on the ground after everything that had happened. After a while, the professors who noticed the error in setting up the dungeon to train newcomers gave them rewards in the form of valuable magical items. While Hanshiha was waiting in the reception area of the dean's office, he decided to examine the basilisk's characteristics to see if he had been able to train it. The cute and cheerful dragon Basilisk Atrax already had level 3 fire breath thanks to a trap in the training dungeon. Hanshiha didn't know what the dark magicians were cultivating in the dungeon, but he knew that this dragon was particularly capable of learning. He realized that he would have to take very good care and carefully nurture this capable baby dragon. Hanshiha took out a slime kernel from his bag, which the professor passed by quite calmly, and offered it to Basilisk to try, because it gave him strength. Basilisk didn't like the idea at all, and wasn't really interested in trying the core of the slime monster. After agreeing to try the core, the dragon immediately spit it out, but his stats increased by several units. Basilisk felt that he had become stronger, so he decided to overpower himself and taste some more monster cores that give strength and mana. Hanshiha was overjoyed because he began to hear the non-stop sound of notifications of the Basilisk's performance upgrades. Adele entered the waiting room and started cursing at Hanshiha that because of him, she had to prove to everyone that she was the only one who could handle the monster. She reported that everyone now thought she was the only one who had handled the broken monsters, and she should be given more magic items. Hanshiha decided to ask her what she had come to the dean's office for, and asked her to speak a little quieter because she was yelling too much. He thought about the fact that he didn't want to publicize what had happened in the dungeon so as not to draw more attention to his person. Adele thought for a moment and told him that if he had any sympathy for her, he'd better get those thoughts out of his head. Han Shiha was very surprised and didn't understand what sympathy had to do with it because he didn't know Adele at all. Adela began to resent and scream even more from Han Shiha, stating that he doesn't know her or know her at all. Covering her ears from screaming so loudly, Han Shiha asked her what her name even was and why she was screaming so loudly. Adela Stevia once again introduced herself to him and continued to yell because she didn't understand why things had gotten this way and what to do about the situation. Han Shiha remembered that Adela was the only student of low origin, but was among those heroes who would later take his life. Adela smiled and asked if he had really heard absolutely nothing about her before, since she was in the top 3. Han Shiha thought about the fact that he himself had come out to meet the person who would bury him with his own hands in the future. He didn't understand why he'd been so careless, and Adela asked if he even looked in the mirror once in a while. Adela tugged his sleeve toward the mirror and asked him if he was sure he should go to the dean's office in such dirty and unkempt clothes. Then, Han Shiha thought that probably everyone avoided him, not because they were afraid of dark magic, but because they were disgusted to be around him. Han Shiha decided to change everything about himself and be more neat and tidy, and first of all, to solve the issue with his hair to make it look neater. The next day, he came into the classroom and all the students started discussing that he was completely different from the previous sullen Han Shiha. Discussions were coming from all directions, and Han Shiha smiled and thought about whether the classmates realized that he could hear all their conversations perfect. His thoughts were interrupted by Crick, who came up to him and said that he also wanted to be treated with pomorphs, asking where he got them. Han Shiha remembered from history that Shout was a commoner and always lashed out at him to assert himself at his expense. Shout continued his attacking tactics and talked about how the new hairstyle would do nothing to change the real Han Shiha. However, to his surprise, Han Shiha replied that he didn't have to report to him and asked him to step back and not interfere with his preparations for class. The shouting didn't stop and talked about how even the family had given up on Han Shiha, so he had no right to talk to him like that as if he had someone. Han Shiha calmly let the basilisk out of the bag as Shout spoke up for support himself and asked what he needed after all. While Crick didn't understand what was going on, the other students were speculating on how an ordinary student got a red dragon and how he was able to tame it. Crick suggested that just in spite of the fact that the family had given up on their son, he still had too much cash left over. Han Shiha replied that it was strange to hear such a statement because a dragon cannot be tamed with any amount of money. He decided to protect himself, so he said that although the dragon was still a baby, it wouldn't sit so still on the desk if it hadn't been tamed. Shout was very angry and didn't understand why Han Shiha had changed so much and was starting to feel overly confident. Han Shiha said smilingly that the entrance exams would be a test to see who would stay in school and who would have to go home. Crick accepted his bet and said that if he scored lower on his exams, he would bark like a dog in public. Han Shiha recalled that in his past life, he was called Mad Dog because he always resolved disputes through knowledge. His thoughts were interrupted by other students who started laughing at him, saying that he was already at risk of expulsion, and he decided to start argument. Han Shiha turned to them and asked the loudest of them to give his name right now, so that he would understand exactly who he was dealing with. Fabian Den Edwin was very surprised that Han Shiha didn't know his name, because he was the most famous and popular on the stream. From the character's backstory, Han Shiha remembered that Fabian was the leader of the bullying, so he asked Basilisk to bite him hard and painfully. Fabian, realizing that it was the same red dragon, was very scared, and tried to escape from it somehow. After a while, Adela coached Han Shiha and talked about how he had made too much noise in the past few. Han Shiha replied that he had unleashed the basilisk on the royal disciples only because they were the first to bully him. Adele was glad that Han Shiha harassed not only commoners, but also students of more noble status if they angered him. She realized that he was completely lacking any strategy, so he offered a wager to Crick, who was much stronger than him. Adele realized that competing with Shout in the exam with Han Shiha's current level of magic was just crazy. Holding out her hand to him, she didn't realize what he would be doing with all of this, then, if she hadn't agreed to help him and teach him basic skills in magic. Han Shiha replied to her that she was actually learning taming from him in exchange for magic lessons, and Adele replied that this was their last battle. She said that if he could defeat her, he would be able to defeat Crick and his level of magical ability in the exam. Han Shiha replied that he was fully prepared and would be more careful and cautious compared to yesterday. After that, they embarked on a final training battle to hone their magical skills and ability. After a while, It was time for the entrance exams, and Professor Green prepared to take credit from the students for their admission. Adele, along with her hound dog, were able to pass the pet taming exam with ease and receive the highest score on the test. Han Shiha was glad that Adele did well and was able to handle her dog in just a few of their lessons. He was invited next for the test and headed towards the magic cube inside which the exam would take place. The monster taming and training exam takes place inside a magic cube where the pet must handle a high-level monster. Han Shiha realized that he would be able to get credit once he passed the test, so he exhaled and walked inside the magic. Inside the cube, he was met by Adepteon, who was a large and strong dragon-like serpent of impressive size. Adapteon was a level 3 monster, and according to Shiha's historical characterization, he suffered greatly at his hands and could not defeat him. The basilisk was very scared at first, but Han Shiha calmed him down and reminded him that he had eaten many monster nuclei and was now strong. Basilisk saw that his master was very serious about winning, so he decided to trust him and his elaborate strategy. Han Shiha said that the basilisk must be careful and remember that the weakest point of snakes is the eyes. While Han Shiha was distracting Adapteon, the basilisk immediately went to him to apply a fiery breath towards the side of his opponent's eye. Once Basilisk did as Han Shiha recommended him, he managed to defeat Adapteon and take his life in one blow. Professor Green, who was watching this, opened his mouth in surprise because he was sure that Han Shiha wouldn't be able to handle this test. He realized that even a third-year student couldn't handle such a monster so quickly and easily because he had planned to replace it but didn't have time. Smiling, Han Shiha said that he had a lot of trouble with the monster, but he was still able to defeat it, so he asked if he would get credit. Professor Green said it took 20 minutes and 16 seconds, so he gets a grade-level rank instead of a C grade. Han Shiha was aghast and didn't understand why he had gotten an immediate rank instead of a grade for trying so hard with a higher-ranked monster. Adela said, after the exam, that she was very happy for Han Shiha because he had gotten the highest scores on the taming exam and a whole rank. She was very pleased with herself because their training had gone well and Han Shiha had actually been able to learn magic techniques. Han Shiha was a little puzzled because he had planned to rank 15th and continue to lead a quiet and peaceful life. Adela asked him how he did on the arithmetic test he had this morning and how many points he was able to score. Han Shiha replied that he passed it with an average score, and Adela said that she completely failed the test, so she was a little worried. She said the exam was too hard, and Han Shiha thought the questions were so easy that he made mistakes on purpose. Adela was very upset that the questions were from a program they hadn't even gone through yet, and Han Shiha decided to teach her lesson. She realized that the results of entrance exams would determine not only their enrollment in the course, but also the size of their future scholarship. Afterward, she decided to clarify whether Han Shiha was able to solve the 27th problem on geometric and vector magic circle. Han Shiha thought that this was the easiest task, so he solved it and wrote down the rest of the answers incorrectly. Adela couldn't believe that he was able to solve the single most difficult problem that no other student could handle. When Han Shiha heard this, he was a little nervous, realizing that he would most likely attract a lot of attention again. Meanwhile, Celine informed the professor that only one student from the entire class had solved the 27th problem with the rest of the equations unsolved. The professor decided to watch the test because he realized that he had purposely supplemented the problem with an equation that was beyond the power of the second year. Celine reported that in doing so, all other tasks were solved incorrectly, perhaps intentionally to demonstrate ability level. The professor thought about it, because Han Shiha had also stood out a lot compared to the other students in the monster taming exam. The next day, the lists with the results of the conducted exam were posted, and all the students lined up to look at the lists. Scream ranked 32nd place as usual, but Han Shiha was surprisingly already in 11th place among the others. Shout, seeing Han Shiha, was very unhappy because he realized that he had lost the bet and would have to fulfill the terms of their bet. Han Shiha called Shout to him and asked him to come with him to talk about what had happened. All the students were very surprised that Han Shiha was able to rank so high on the ranking. Han Shiha looked at Crick with disdain and asked him how much 10 plus 1 would be. Crick answered 2, and Han Shiha replied that it was completely wrong, and he still placed 11th overall. Han Shiha realized that Shout had always provoked him, but he didn't want to humiliate him in front of everyone. The latter began to shout that they had not agreed and that they had other terms of the bet. Han Shiha turned around and asked Crick to come to the old abandoned basement of the academy later to continue the conversation. When he came to the basement, he said that he was not at all interested in such a fulfillment of the terms of the bet, so he had another offer. Crick was very angry and didn't understand what exactly Han Shiha wanted from him, since he had actually lost their argument together. Han asked Crick to calm down because he just planned to talk to him and find out who his father was first. Crick was very surprised at such a question and said that Han Shiha's father is the founder of the Ardell Empire who took the lives of dark mages. Han Tosu was the richest man in the empire, and Crick thought that Han Shiha had asked this to humiliate him at the expense of his status. After getting the answer to the first question, Han Shiha asked Crick to spread some rumors since he had so many friends and acquaintances. After communicating the gist of the rumor, Han Shiha asked him to spread it as soon as possible to the various disciples of all courses. Shout was very surprised by such a thing and didn't understand why Han Shiha would spread such a strange rumor throughout the academy. Meanwhile, a counselor came to Count Hantasu to inform him that they had received news from Ardell Academy on his youngest son. The counselor reported that the situation was not very favorable because the count had forbidden sending money to the young gentleman. Han Tisu said he did it intentionally to teach his youngest son a lesson and wean him away from thinking about dark magic. The counselor reported that his son, on the contrary, had dramatically changed his behavior and received an incredibly high grade on the exam. Han Tisu was sure that his son had just managed to avoid the last place. However, he couldn't believe that he had taken the 11th place. The counselor added that rumors had spread throughout the academy that the gentleman was tall and particularly attractive. Han Tae-soo interrupted his business because he couldn't understand how his youngest son had become so smart. He was very surprised at the counselor's words that his youngest son was actually able to change a lot. He recalled that his entire childhood had been very strict with him because of his addiction to dark magical power. Han Tae-soo said that if the sole heir of the estate could enroll in the Faculty of Magic, he would restore its funding. After a while, Han Shiha looked at his bank account statement records and couldn't believe that he had so much money available. He understood that his father was a man of honor, so the rumors that Creek had spread had an impact on restoring the cash flow. Adela didn't understand what Han Shiha was doing and decided to hurry him up because the ceremony was already starting in the auditorium. The ceremony was to be the distribution of all the students in the faculty according to their current skills and abilities. Dean Ernies greeted all the students and said that they should, after the name was called, go up on stage and put their hand on the cube. Han Shiha started to get really worried because in the original story, he was supposed to go to the dark magic department and he didn't want that. So he looked hopefully at the magic cube and wondered what it would produce this time with the current data. The first to be invited to the stage was Lee Hen, who was ranked first in academic performance, and he always came first among all the others. Han Shiha remembered that in his character's story, Lee Han had taken the place of the protagonist himself, and it disturbed him greatly. Of course, Lee Han walked over to the magic cube, which immediately assigned him to the magic faculty. The next student to determine faculty was Sylvia Arcanet, who headed toward the stage to interact with the magic cube. Han Shiha knew from the story that Sylvia was the chief light mage and was a close comrade of the main character of the story. He realized that the result was quite obvious, and of course, after interacting with the magic cube, Sylvia had gotten into the Faculty of Magic. Next, all students were assigned by ranking, and Seymour Parker was assigned to the Department of Dark Magic and Ritual. Student Yoon Ha-ol was assigned to the Theology Department after interacting with the magic cube. Listening to the names of the students and their faculty of assignment, Han Shiha realized that everything went from the main characters in the story to the minor character. After a certain number of distributed students, Han Shiha was invited to the stage to interact with the magic cube. Han Shihe placed his hands on the magic cube that soared up and began to determine his ability level to determine the faculty. Seeing the red color of the final cube, Professor Grint was very surprised and looked at Han Shiha carefully. Everyone was very much surprised because Han Shiha had been assigned to the magic faculty based on the results of his interaction with the magic cube. All the students began to actively discuss not understanding how a student who used dark magic could end up in the white magic faculty. Only Adela started shouting from the audience that she was very happy about this allocation and they would be able to see each other at the faculty. Han Shiha was very surprised that Adela was so excited and appeared to be hoping that he would also be enrolled in her white magic department. Adela said she was glad because if he had gotten into the dark magic department, they would have had to fight all the time. Their conversation was interrupted by Lee Han, who called out to Han Shiha and said he was glad they were in the same department. Lee Han extended his hand to him and said that he was surprised that Han Shiha was interested in ordinary magic and hoped that they could work together. As he came closer, he said that he had heard that he had been locked in a dungeon just before the practical exam began. Lee Han said that he thought it was interesting because there was a mistake in the dungeon, and even with Adela, they had no chance of surviving. Heian Shiha wondered how Li Han knew about the incident in the dungeon since all the teachers were hiding the incident. He started to get very worried, because if the protagonist had already started suspecting him of dark magic now, there might be trouble. Heian Shiha replied that he was a little confused during the dungeon program failure and it was Adele who managed to solve everything. Next, Han Shiha went to a newly built dormitory that looked more like a 5-star hotel. After spending a few minutes looking for the north wing and the 206th room, Han Shiha looked around and admired the renovation. Upon entering the room, he was immediately greeted by a student who began shouting with excitement that he would be living with Han Shiha himself. Han Shiha was a little surprised by this reaction, so he decided to ask what the reason for their joy was. The student explained that Han Shiha was the star of the distribution ceremony because he was able to put the royal family man in his place with one word. Han Shiha remembered that after the ceremony, Fabian was very angry because he didn't understand why he couldn't get into the magic department. Fabian resented him a lot, and Han Shiha asked him to be more quiet because he wasn't really related to the royal family. Fabian immediately changed after such words and began to cry in public and asked not to tell anyone about it because he was not worthy to be a mage. Han Shiha hadn't counted on being listened to by all the students present at the ceremony and the rumors that quickly spread. He realized that there was no way his plan to lead a quiet student life was going to work out properly. One introduced himself, and Han Shiha realized that according to history, it was One who was Han Shiha's best friend and helped with various things. One didn't understand why Han Shiha was so surprised, and Shiha thought about the fact that in the current situation, he was surrounded by heroes who should take his life. One said that he had a map of the dormitory, but he would be more interested in exploring with Han Shiha himself. Han Shiha agreed to do his own reconnaissance of the dormitory grounds, and he and One went to explore the halls and rooms together. Looking around the grounds and facilities, they managed to find a mess hall with a not-so-skilled cook and a field for magical training. One talked about how it was best not to get close to the arena during training, and Han Shiha didn't understand why a barrier couldn't be set up. Han Shiha listened attentively to One because he realized that although he was talking too much, he had valuable information. Suddenly, dark clouds enveloped the whole area, and a very strange rain started to fall, and Vaughn wanted to run and let the teachers know about it. All the students started worrying and screaming when they saw that the raindrops instantly corroded the ground, which meant it was poisonous. Hearing that Adela and Arsenella had just disappeared, Han Shiha remembered that according to his character's story, this was how the second chapter started. The system notified him that the character had indeed been moved to Chapter 2 in the kidnapping episode on the dormitory ground. Meanwhile, Arknella, Sylvia, and Adela were tied up and outside in the caustic raindrop. Arknella tried to free herself, but Sylvia told her not to waste her strength because the liana couldn't be torn so easily. Sylvia explained that she had been trying to find her opponent's weak spot all this time, but unfortunately she had failed to do so. Adela recalled that they had been kidnapped by a man in a dark cloak who had imprisoned them inside a large and very old tree for some reason. She realized that unlike Sylvia, she was a commoner without particularly outstanding skills or abilities. For a moment, she thought about what Han Shiha would do in her place, and even began to feel angry that she had thought of him at all. Solia said that the tree probably can't tolerate light because the last thing they saw was a dark, dense fog. Looking at the structure of the tree trunk, Sylvia realized that it was probably artificial, so it didn't tolerate light. Adela and Sylvia realized that Ardell Academy had been attacked by dark mages, which meant it was best to counter with light magic. Adela realized that Solia was only level 2 in light magic, but in such a small space it might work. Solia began to use light magic with a prosperity spell and bless the earth by filling herself with rays of light. Adela looked at her and really hoped that with light of this intensity, they should be able to do well and free themselves. Suddenly, the tree began to envelop Sylvia in dark rays, with dark magic completely blocking her powers and abilities. The one who controlled the tree informed that no matter how capable they were only second-year students and therefore would not succeed. The tree began to lure Sylvia to him with the help of penetrating and dominating her thoughts. Adela, realizing what was happening, began to distract the tree so that Sylvia could return to her senses and not be provoked. Seeing Sylvia's condition, Adela realized that someone was using mental magic to search for her opponent's innermost desires. So, Adela began to provoke the dark tree in every way possible to completely divert his attention away from Sylvia. However, the provocations caused the man who controlled the tree to become angry and beam rays of dark magic towards Adela. Adela realized she couldn't reflect or block this type of magic, but at that moment, a bolt of lightning swept over her head and shattered the enchantment. Seeing the dark magic begin to break down, Adela realized it was light magic, but didn't understand how Solivia had managed to gain so much strength. Seeing Vaughn near Solivia, who was still feeling ill after the effects of the mental magic, Adela decided to turn around. Standing over her was Hanshiha, along with Basilisk, who said that he had managed to make things quite spectacular. Adela didn't understand how he knew where to find them, or how he was able to use such strong light magic. Hanshiha started laughing at the fact that Adela started asking a lot of meaningless questions as usual, instead of thanking him for saving her. He explained to her that he used the usual simple light magic, but to strengthen it, he used a magic light magnifier, which is always with him. Then he handed Adela the sword, and said that since she was intact, she should assist him in the battle outside the tree. Taking the sword, Adela was very surprised, but was glad that Hanshiha had come to save her just in time. Adela realized that he had brought her her own old training sword, and since the opponent was a dark mage, she didn't want to hold back. The dark mage, after the lightning damage, could no longer disguise himself because he felt a terrible pain that enveloped him. Hanshiha and Basilisk noticed that the dark magician did not attack them, but decided to completely block the space where they were. Suddenly, the dark magician said that he had regained his powers, so he began to attack Hanshiha, who dared to oppose him. Hanshiha began to feel that a control spell was being applied to him because all his thoughts were about joining the dark magic and their guild. The dark magician tried his best to use dark magic and glamorize Hanshiha to completely subjugate him. However, Hanshiha didn't fall for the provocation because the dark mage used the character's own memories to manipulate him. The dark magician didn't understand why the control spell didn't work because the conditions were perfect, and Hanshiha laughed, saying that the opponent was too weak. Hanshiha saw that the enemy would be in fusion with the tree feeding dark magic, and Adela said that the tree was vulnerable to rays of light. After thinking for a bit, Hanshiha realized that the wood was also not resistant to fire, so he immediately gave the order to the basilisk. The dark mage, seeing the attempted attack, decided to attack first, and the basilisk took the brunt of the damage, saving his master. Looking around, Hanshiha was startled because the tree roots were already very close and completely surrounded him. Using light magic, Adela pulled back the roots of the dark tree and said that Hanshiha would now have a debt to him. At the same time, the dark mage was the strongest opponent for ordinary students and quickly regenerated his strength and mana. Vaughn watched as Solia recovered, but she was still very weak and unable to launch attack. Suddenly it rained, and the dark mage was surprised but realized that as soon as the light ended, he would regain full control. Embracing Hanshiha's tree roots, the dark mage was already anticipating his victory, but his opponent pulled out a magic pointer. With it, he created a lightning spell that he channeled directly into the roots of the dark tree, dealing damage to it and the dark mage. Hanshiha was happy that his plan had worked out, but the dark mage couldn't understand why the control magic didn't work at all on him. The dark magician, after receiving the damage, immediately went to get the magic cube, while Hanshiha tried to remember what exactly he had heard about the cube and its use. Solia regained consciousness and approached Hanshiha, and said that they had something to discuss now. Hanshiha turned to Solia Arknet and thanked her for her help and the idea of attacking with light magic. Solia became worried and said she had nothing to be thankful for because he was the one who came up with the idea to enhance the light spell with water. Hanshiha reminded her that although his plan was perfect, there were also risks, which was why Solia had put up the magic barrier. Solia admitted that she was very surprised that Hanshiha knew how to properly use her light magic and thanked him for his help. Adela said she didn't really understand why they were kidnapped, but judging by what was going on, they were going to be subjugated by dark magic. Hanshiha realized that the dark mage had kidnapped the best female students to use as puppets and thanked Basilisk for his help. Vaughn and Adela laughed, saying that Basilisk was just really worried about his master. That's why he flew into his arm. One and Hanshiha decided to continue looking around and wandered into a very swampy area that took a lot of energy. Hanshiha realized that this area was not suitable for walking, but his goal was to find the secret location of Artel Academy. Going inside the secret room, the boys were surprised to see a large number of all sorts of treasures and relics. Vaughn wondered if all this amount of treasure had an owner, but the statue at the entrance was a 300-year-old relic. Basilisk's dragon instincts immediately kicked in, and he began to hug the largest gold bars. Han Shiha realized why the basilisk liked cheese so much, because it was also like a gold bar. To one's surprise, Han Shiha allowed him to take any items and relics from this treasure vault for his personal use. Han Shiha himself went to the depths of the treasure where there was a small chest with a magic book inside. It was originally written on the book that it contained dark magic spells, but after synchronization, it contained spells for a beginner. Han Shiha realized that he was holding a book that could be used to learn the spells that were taught for a whole year. When he decided to go outside the treasure vault, he heard someone start calling him an outsider. Looking around, he realized he was the only one who heard the sound, and the book in his hands began to glow and transform. Then he read that this book welcomes all outsiders who cross worlds and change them in a completely different way. Han Shiha realized that he was really changing the world, because originally he was not supposed to be here today, but was supposed to lose his life. The book flew up and said that it was the book of Carmen's prophecy, and whatever was written in it must be fulfilled. Han Shiha realized he was caught up in the story, and because of his selfishness and desire to live, he completely changed what couldn't be changed. However, the Book of Prophecy said that if he did choose such a role, she was willing to accept him if he would perform miracles in this world. The Book of Prophecy warned him that if he did not act, this world would go down a bad path and begin to collapse. As Han Shiha fainted from overexertion, one was very afraid for him and carried him to his bed in his dorm room. After checking that the comrade had regained consciousness, Wan asked him to rest today and went to the store for food and medicine. Left alone, Han Shiha thought about the fact that he now had a major role to play and should be more careful in his choices and decisions. He recalled that in his previous life, when he was a veterinarian, he had made a lot of enemies because he was also unable to lead a quiet existence. Han Shiha realized that the fate of the heroes and the fate of the Ardal Academy itself depended on it, which meant that he had a great responsibility. The dean's office later scolded him and Vaughn for not defending the academy from the attack, but praised them for bravely rescuing their classmate. After being discharged from the hospital wing, Han Shiha learned that he was to take part in the first team's practical magic assignment. Han Shiha realized that in team projects, one can get to know other students and their degree of responsibility in completing assignments better. Professor Green said he really hoped the teams could work together and left the choice of team recruitment up to the student. Han Shiha, realizing that they only had 10 minutes to form teams, decided to rest in hopes that someone would just pick him. His calmness was interrupted by Li Han, who invited Han Shiha to join his team and assist in the magic task. Han Shiha was completely unwilling to do the magic task with him, so he publicly just turned him down. Wanadella and Solia were very surprised at this abruptness, but were glad that Han Shiha accepted their offer to be a team on the mission. Han Shiha decided to change the subject, saying that they had new uniforms because he didn't want to talk about how he refused Li Han's command participation. Vaughn was also very happy that they all had red ties, saying they were in the magic training department. Han Shiha was glad that he was able to change the topic of conversation, and he suggested that they move on to selecting a dungeon for their team assignment. Solia and Adela were very surprised at choosing such a low-level dungeon, but Han Shiha said that there were C-rank items hidden inside. Han Shiha didn't want to tell the whole truth about his knowledge of dungeon caches and said that he just likes to read books. After a while, the Dark Magicians of the Dark Magic Training Course learned that Han Shiha was going to visit the Phantom Forest dungeon with his team. After learning about it, the team captain realized that he too had the desire to go to this dungeon and explore it. Vaughn and his team traveled to the entrance of the Ghost Forest dungeon, which was inside the library of Ardal Academy. At the entrance, they were met by Asher Barton, who was a freshman at the academy and wished to enter the dungeon. When Han Shiha heard this name, he thought that it was very familiar to him from history and began to remember his role. Then he remembered that this first-year student had a great influence in the theology department because he had the gift of clairvoyance. Han Shiha then decided to ask Asheru directly what he saw in the future and why he decided to go to the B-rank dungeon with them. Asher was very puzzled by this question because he didn't advertise his abilities in public or demonstrate them at all. Yun Hae said that Asher could be useful to them in the dungeon because he has the ability to see ghosts and apparitions. Yun Hae was a second-year student in the theology department and looked after Asher at the academy. She reported that Asher had actually seen something in the last clairvoyance practice, and so had persistently asked the teachers for access to go to the dungeon. Yoon Hye managed to get permission for Asher, but on the condition that she would guard and protect him from the monsters and their effects. Han Shiha began to worry that they might have been hired by another team to sabotage their dungeon and mission. Yoon Hye said that he has absolutely nothing to worry about because she only agreed to go because Han Shi-ha was very nice to her. Han Shi-ha couldn't believe his ears and had absolutely no plans to have a relationship with a girl during the academy. Since the other team members had agreed to Asher and Yoon Hye-um's presence, they decided to proceed to open the portal to the dungeon. A basilisk was a bit scared because the only dungeon he was in was the training arena with the slime. Once inside, everyone was given a dark blindfold to see the ghost, but there were fewer of them than the team members. Han Shi-ha was very happy that they had assigned roles beforehand, and one, along with Adele, walked ahead in their scouting blindfold. Sola and Basilisk followed and attacked the smaller and more visible monsters with light and fire magic. The theology students watched the actions of the teamwork and realized that they didn't even have anything to help them in this dungeon. Asher was surprised by Han Shi-ha's actions because he hadn't studied theology, but he acted very coherently and made no mistake. Asher realized that his vision had not deceived him, and a stranger coming from another world could really save their own world. Suddenly, Asher shouted because he saw a large blob of dark energy coming from the dungeon boss moving towards Han Shi-ha. The dungeon boss had very great strength and possessed a dark magic psychic attack working based on memories. Solia Han Shi-ha Basilisk stood up against the dungeon boss because they had already been able to withstand this level of attack once before. Han Shi-ha started to counter the boss's attack, realizing that he was a very strong opponent and his attack was quite fast. He tried to resist the psychic attack, but found himself in a room of emptiness, realizing that something around him was not right after all. Turning around, he saw his real memories from his past life and how he had lost to animal surgery. He began to see not-so-great memories from his past life and how he was discussed by his co-worker. Han Shi-ha thought back to his past life and realized that he had no regrets about his actions and deeds because he did everything as he thought was right. He realized that his boss was a very bad man, and he had to expose his machinations at the cost of his own reputation. His hands often shook due to anxiety, so he was not allowed to go to the operating table, and all his colleagues laughed at him. Han Shi-ha realized that he might have had a completely different path in his past life, but he couldn't deal with his worries. His thoughts were interrupted by Basilisk, and he didn't understand how the baby dragon had managed to invade another's mental space. Han Shi-ha was very happy to see the Basilisk and his devotion, which meant that their souls were connected on a mental level. The basilisk began to actively wave its paws and revealed that the monster's heart held a ghost lamp that was a secret item. Asking for help from the basilisk, Han Shi-ha was able to launch a triple arrow, and the ghostly lamp was right in front of it. When Han Shi-ha took it in his hands, he realized that he hadn't changed at all, and in his previous life, he had only done everything to save defenseless animals. Seeing the ghost lamp, Wan was very surprised that Han Shi-ha had actually managed to find a high-level secret item. Sola Lee didn't understand how a dungeon of such a low rank could have such strong magic in an empty room of dark space. Han Shi-ha said that he didn't really understand how it all happened and why the ghost lamp was emitting such strong magic. Seo Lee and Wan started looking around and didn't realize where Asher Barton and Yoon Hyul had gone. Turning around, they saw that the boys were captive, and very close to them stood Seymour Parker's team. Han Shi-ha realized that according to history, this was the time when the plan of the mages of the dark magic faculty. Seymour Parker, taking off his hood, said he wanted to steal the item after their confrontation with the boss, so he thinks he came at the right time. Parker pointed to a girl on his team and said that they know who Han Shi-ha is and are willing to give him one last chance. Pointing to Wanadella and Seymour Parker's Seolia, said that Han Shi-ha only needs to just betray them now. Han Shi-ha realized that Seymour was really up to something and had a plan for further action. Adela and Solia, watching what was happening, didn't want to believe that Han Shi-ha had really decided to return to dark magic and was just using them. Adela didn't understand why they were so friendly and how Han Shi-ha could act so horribly towards them. She heard Han Shi-ha tell Seymour that he was willing to help them with a serious demon summoning ritual. Adela listened to their conversation, and in her heart, she asked Han Shi-ha to stop and say that none of this could be true. Sola realized that for their demon summoning ritual, they would be needed as puppets in which to house the souls of demons for control. Seymour relaxed and was very happy that Han Shi-ha had gathered such a suitable team and brought them straight to him. Extending his hand for a handshake, Han Shi-ha unexpectedly used a lightning discharge and dealt damage to Seymour Parker. Han Shi-ha said that Seymour's plan was good, but he miscalculated in underestimating his opponent by trusting. Realizing that he had been tricked, Seymour was very angry and decided to immediately attack Han Shi-ha, to also use him in his summoning ritual. From the suddenness and force of the blow, Han Shi-ha was thrown against a tree, and Adela immediately ran to him to assess his well-being. She was very happy that Han Shiha was still alive and conscious, and that he had not betrayed them and his choice of the Faculty of Magic. Adela admitted that she was glad he had stayed on their side, or she would have had to take his life with her own hands. Seymour Parker was very strong because, according to the story, he will become the main villain who can defeat even Li Han. Adela and Solia decided to hold off the other members of the opposing team because Parker was basically only aiming at Han Shiha. Meanwhile, Han Shiha tried his best to resist his opponent, but at some point, his magic wand was taken away from him. Realizing that Seymour Parker was seconds away from gaining victory, the basilisk immediately headed in his direction to protect his master. The system notified that the basilisk's stats had been upgraded, and they now had a fireball available to attack. Without a second thought, Han Shiha immediately used it, and Sola put up a magic shield around her comrades to protect them from the fire and lightning. Han Shiha fell to his knees after applying the spell because the spell was very strong and required a lot of energy. However, Seymour Parker continued to stand on his feet and came closer, saying that he wouldn't let Han Shiha just survive. Suddenly, he fell down, and Han Shiha saw a girl with a shovel in her hands, who was originally in Seymour Parker's squad, but decided to go against. Seeing her face, Han Shiha began to faint from lack of strength and not understanding how she was here. After the treatment, Professor Green announced the results where Han Shiha's team, as expected, scored the highest. Adela praised Han Shiha for everything, because they were the only team on the stream that got an excellent grade for completing the assignment. A few days later, Han Shiha came to the dungeon of Ardell Academy to visit and assist Seymour Parker. Seymour Parker hadn't expected to see Han Shiha, and he wondered what he had come to visit him for in Ardell Academy's punishment cell. Han Shiha started laughing at him, saying that since he was from a noble family, his parents would probably reject him after such events. Seymour was very angry at such remarks, but he didn't want to be provoked, and asked him to tell him directly what Han Shiha had come to see him for. Han Shiha smiled and handed him an envelope with a letter saying that Seymour's father would be arriving soon, and he should be prepared for it. Seymour wondered what exactly was inside the letter, and why it should be sent before his family decided to reject. Han Shiha explained that the letter contained information from the Order of Dark Mages, that they were using Seymour for their own purposes. Realizing that this letter was a chance for rescue, Seymour Parker didn't understand why Han Shiha had decided to give him such help. Han Shiha said that everything was fake except the seal itself, and he got the letter from someone at the academy who wanted to help Seymour. After Han Shiha went in to see the dean of Ardell Academy, and the latter asked if he had managed to deliver the letter to Seymour Parker. Han Shiha thanked Dean Ernest for facilitating the letter and allowing it to be forwarded to its intended destination. Ernest admitted that Han Shiha's request for a pardon for Seymour Parker initially puzzled him a lot, and he thought about it for a long time. He realized that Seymour was the leader of the Dark Mages Club, and the incident that had happened could not simply go unpunished. Han Shiha explained that Seymour Parker was a man who was willing to accomplish anything for the revenge that drove him. In this regard, if Seymour was expelled from the academy, he could have taken an even worse path and returned to destroy Ardell Academy. That was why Han Shiha had asked for Seymour's pardon, in order to let his talents in dark magic go in a more useful direction. Dean Ernest was pleasantly surprised that Han Shiha had such a well-developed teaching talent. Natalie, who assisted in the rescue of Han Shiha, was also very happy that the worst was over. Dean has infiltrated Natalie into the Dark Mage clan as an agent to try to keep the club's situation under control. Ernest confirmed Natalie's words, but Seymour was so secretive and meticulously prepared that they couldn't change the situation in time. Natalie admitted that it was only after entering the dungeon that she was able to assess the situation, and she was grateful to Han Shiha for his help. Han Shiha became very embarrassed and admitted that he was primarily doing everything for his own salvation. Ernest said that he had thought it over well and proposed to the international magic research community to nominate Shiha as a representative. Han Shiha realized that his becoming a representative of Ardell Academy was in direct opposition to his goal of living peacefully and quietly. Han Shiha was even more surprised that he was ranked third in the overall ranking of the Academy's faculty disciples after completing the team assignment. Back in his room, Han Shiha couldn't believe that it had happened like this, and Wan asked Basilisk to be careful with his master. After learning that Han Shiha had come in third place, Wan realized that Solia wouldn't be very happy because she had held that position for a long time. After slightly translating his thoughts, Han Shiha remembered that after passing the Ghost Forest dungeon, he had received a personalized reward and decided to open it. When he opened the reward, he was surprised that he got a rank A Terra A monster egg, because he expected to get something else. Then everyone began to prepare for the exhibition of outstanding mages from all over the world, which was to last for 3 days. International competitions were very important because at stake was not only the honor of the academy, but also the honor of the whole country. Han Shiha realized that it would be a very difficult competition, and Adela said that they got the herbology assignment. Li Han and Adela discussed that they went over the basics of herbology back in freshman year, and they should just repeat their knowledge. He pulled a herbology textbook out of his bag and offered to study from it during the trip to refresh his memory. When Adela saw the textbook, she immediately ran away and said that she would rather run out to get food and drinks for everyone than listen to another lecture. While they were alone, Li Han decided to check with Han Shiha to see where he got the Dark Mage map from, and if he had brought it with him. Han Shiha remembered that when Li Han had entered his room, he had accidentally seen the map on the table and scrutinized. He didn't want to explain why he needed the map, because with its help, he wanted to find a magic cube filled with dark energy. Upon arriving at the Seinan Empire, Han Shiha realized that they would be going to a conference, but knew that this was where he would be able to find the cube. At the conference first, all teams met and attended herbology classes, and even had time to measure their strengths. After spending many hours in lectures, Han Shiha realized that in 2 days, the competition would begin and his team should receive awards. However, as soon as he decided to go to bed, he heard a strange noise and got up from his bed and saw Li Han outside his window. Han Shiha didn't really understand what was going on and why Li Han had decided to sneak into his room through the window instead of entering through the door. Li Han explained that he went this way because there were scout mages in the corridor wearing invisible Casper cloaks. Han Shiha didn't understand why the Caspers, who were royal intelligence mages, were attending a simple disciple conference. Li Han replied that he didn't know anything about it and had only come to see him to borrow the map he saw on the table. He realized that the location of the cube was marked on the map, and Shiha decided to pretend that he didn't know anything about it and didn't pay attention to the word cube. Li Han's parents sealed such cubes, but soon lost their lives at the hands of dark mages, and he himself wanted to continue their work. Li Han admitted that the map showed a place not far from here, and tomorrow was their last day in the Empire, so he wanted to check it out. Han Shiha said after thinking for a while that he couldn't give him the map, but was willing to go with him to scout the marked place. Li Han said that he wasn't ready to give him all the details, but could only say that the cube was a very dangerous artifact. Han Shiha said he didn't know what Li Han was up to, and since the map was his, he could go with him, but not otherwise. Li Han thought and said that tomorrow they should win at the competition, and only then would they go do what they have to. After looking at the map, they realized that the cube was on the 3rd floor of a building at the Faculty of Magic, which was very heavily guarded. Realizing that the magic energy cube was in the basement, Han Shiha offered to take Adela along to help them. Li Han didn't really like the idea, but hiding everything from his own teammate wouldn't be right at all. When the day of the competition came, Han Shiha was very worried because he didn't know anything about herbs and how to use them. At the beginning of the competition, all participants were welcomed by Flora Professor Bruce Miller. All the participants saw that the judges were experienced magicians, and their task was to create a completely new medicine for treatment. Han Shiha realized that in order to get close to the cube, he should try very hard to win this competition. Adela was very dissatisfied because she realized that Han Shiha was quite weak in the subject of making herbal medicine. However, after tasting the prepared medicine, each member of the judging team felt an incredible burst of energy. They could not contain themselves in their hands, and they wanted to definitely start something and create under the influence of the drug. Someone even started creating miniature flower sculptures, completely forgetting about the competition, and the arts medicine was to blame. Han Shiha laughed a little at everyone and himself because he had actually only mixed an existing medicine with an ordinary one from the drugstore. Thanks to such ingenuity, Ardell Academy received many points and was able to get a trip to the Magic Academy Corps as a reward. Bruce Miller praised the winners and hoped they could expand their current knowledge and learn new things during the tour. The professor took us through the floors of the building and told us where and how the training takes place, and how future students are selected for enrollment. Bruce Miller was very pleased that first place went to students who were able to really demonstrate their potential and thirst for knowledge. Han Shiha and Li Han asked the professor to take a short break because the magic faculty building was very big and they were tired during the day. Just then, one of the secretaries called Professor Bruce for help, and he left the boys alone for a while. As soon as the students were left alone, they immediately went to the basement to find the magic cube and tried to do everything quickly and discreetly. Reaching the third floor of the basement, Lee Han handed the guys teleportation scrolls in case they were discovered by the guards. He admitted that he could only find 2 spell scrolls because they were very rare and expensive artifacts. When they reached the 4th level, they saw a very bright light and thought it was probably the vault they were looking for. However, as soon as they got closer, an alarm siren went off and the whole room lit up with a red glow. Han Shaha immediately saw the notification that he needed to retrieve the dark magic cube as soon as possible. Sirens were blaring from all sides, and since there were intruders in the vault, there was going to be a security attack. By putting up a protective magical shield, the team managed to avoid damage, but they heard footsteps approaching. Turning around, they were very surprised to see Professor Greenvee, who was a math teacher at Ardell Academy. Han Shiha tried to justify himself by saying that they were just very lost in the rooms of such a large building and couldn't find their way out. But Professor Greenvee, as a real dark magician, was very happy that thanks to the actions of the students, they were able to discover the magic cube. To the surprise of everyone, he announced that he had specially sent a squad of Casper to investigate the location of the magic cube. Han Shaha, Adela, and Li Han realized that they had to protect the cube from Professor Greenvee, who was actually a dark magician. Adela and the rest of the team tried hard to defend themselves and the others, but they had much less strength than the professor. Han Shiha managed to retrieve the cube from the vault, and he handed it to Li Han, asking him and Adela to use the teleportation scrolls. As soon as they left, Professor Greenvee immediately approached Han Shiha and ordered him to give him the map with the locations of the other magic keys. Being under the influence of the strong magic that enveloped him and took away his ability to exist, Han Shaha only hoped for the basilisk. As soon as the basilisk used fire breath on the professor, Han Shaha immediately broke free from the shackle and began to run away. Professor Greenvee was very angry because he had not expected Han Shiha to be a dragon tamer of such strength. Running outside, Han Shiha and Basilisk saw that they were being chased by 3 people in dark cloaks who were high-level dark magicians. Han Shiha tried to block their magic attacks, but he had absolutely no mana left and realized that his loss was very close. As Han Shiha fell to the ground helplessly, he realized that he had absolutely no chance of winning and could not defend himself either. The dark mages, seeing that their opponent fell down without strength, immediately started to attack him, and Basilisk defended his master, receiving a very strong wound. In the turmoil, the dark mages lost their target out of sight for a while, because everything around them was engulfed in fire. Taking advantage of the situation, Han Shaha grabbed the basilisk, who was already unconscious, and began to run away with all his might. At one point, he saw Adela, who showed him a secluded and safe place where they could not be found by the dark mages. She said that he had been very reckless in going alone with Professor Greenvee, and realized that he had no other choice. Han Shiha explained that he didn't have time to talk because the basilisk was in critical condition and its life was counted in seconds. At this moment, Han Shiha immediately remembered his past life when he was a veterinarian and how hard it was to lose patients during surgery. He asked Adela to give him their art medicine so that he might have at least a ray of hope for the basilisk's recovery. After drinking the medicine in its entirety, Han Shiha realized that he was the only one who could do anything to help Basilisk right now. Preparing the magic tool, Han Shiha realized that he would do everything possible and impossible to restore the basilisk's life. Li Han and Adela watched Han Shiha's efforts and didn't understand why he was spending all his energy treating a dragon when he could tame another. Adela wanted to stop Han Shiha because he was using up all of his strength and mana reserves, but she saw his eyes burning. Han Shiha tried to keep himself under control because in his past life, he couldn't keep everything under control, and his hands started to shake. Having successfully completed the operation, Han Shiha watched as the others admired him, realizing that everyone was used to treating monsters with magic alone. Han Shiha realized that in his previous life in Korea, he would have been sued for performing surgery in unsanitary condition. Then he used the healing light to empower his small but very strong and brave dragon Basilisk. A few days later, Han Shiha regained consciousness in the treatment block of Ardell Academy, and Adela reported that the academy had tried to straighten things out. Adela also said that they were still unable to avoid the various rumors that were spread by the dark mages as well. Afterwards, Li Han came in and, holding out a magic cube, said that a lot of organizations were looking for him. Adela said that they had spent too much effort to get this cube, so they were not willing to give it up so easily. Han Shiha couldn't believe that there was even a court hearing planned for the incident that had occurred within the walls of the magic building. A few days later in the courtroom, Louis Maxwell asked that the Ardell Academy students be punished for their break-in to the vault. Professor Bruce asked everyone to calm down, thinking there had been a misunderstanding, but Lewis thought the vault had been completely destroyed anyway. Han Shiha realized that the contents of the vault were a secret, which meant that the professors didn't know what was missing, so they just denied everything. Lewis absolutely did not want to believe that the students had simply gotten lost and used a search spell to accidentally destroy the vault. The judge bowed his head and said they should wait for a report from the vault owner to determine what was missing. Those present in the courtroom began looking around to determine exactly who owned the storage unit in question. However, everyone was very much surprised when Professor Ernest, the director of Ardell Academy, showed up at the meeting. Lewis thought the principal had come to support his students and let him know they didn't need his protection. Dean Ernest provided all the documents and said that he was the owner of the vault on the 4th level of the basement of the Faculty of Magic. Ernest told the judge that his students had gone down there at his personal request and made some mistakes and destroyed the vault accidentally. After checking all the documents, the judge said that the case was closed, and the students had to apologize in writing and work the required hours. Lewis, the professor of the Faculty of Magic, was very angry, but he realized that there was nothing he could do to change the situation. Afterwards, Ernest took Han Shiha to the reception chambers and told him that he didn't want to ask anything and handed him the letter with the task. Ernest explained that Math Professor Greenvee had disappeared without a trace, but had left this math problem on the table. Han Shiha carefully read the contents of the note and was alarmed to realize that Ernest was asking him to resolve this immediately. Ernest realized that an ordinary student couldn't just win against a professor and mage of the dark arts. Han Shiha said that he was just lucky in that battle and was only able to win because of his team and Basilisk's action. Ernest reports that he found a note in Greenwich's office and is sure it's some kind of cipher hidden in a math problem. Han Shiha was surprised that the director was so confident in him and said he would try to solve this task to help investigate the case. He understood that most likely this cipher could contain the coordinates of the location of another magical artifact in the form of a cube. Ernest looked at Han Shiha carefully and saw how bravely he was willing to take on a task that was probably not solvable at all. In the meantime, Li Ha went to the clairvoyant again to see if Han Shiha's fate had changed and if he could be trusted. The psychic realized that Li Han came to her almost every week asking the same question about Han Shiha's fate. Li Han found it very suspicious that Han Shiha was completely different in his first year and had changed 100% over the summer. The clairvoyant finished her bun and turned to the star that once again revealed that Han Shiha is an outsider in the world of magic, but he is the one who will save the world. She said that both last time and this time, the prediction is the same, and only says that even though Han Shiha is an outsider, he must save the world. To Li Han's surprise, the clairvoyant asked him to keep a closer eye on everything that happens on the grounds of Ardell Academy. She added in a whisper that something very unusual was about to happen at the academy. Adela, meanwhile, lamented that 30 hours of corrective labor was too harsh a punishment for that incident. Han Shiha diligently rubbed and warmed Terra's egg so that the monster would be born as soon as possible and become his pet as well. Suddenly, Vaughn ran in and informed them that the monster from the sample hall had reappeared in the academy and had turned everything in Ardell Academy upside down. Adela was interested and asked if the monster had really appeared, since before it was only unsubstantiated rumors. Han Shiha remembered that the monster from Sample Hall was in the story, but everyone thought it was just a fiction to scare the freshmen. All the students at Ardell Academy have heard of it, but no one has ever been able to see it or get proof of its existence. Han Shiha realized that the dragon monster's main skill is its ability to hide, so even the teachers can't find it. He realized that most likely no one would go to catch the monster, because only a few would be able to see the dragon monster from the specimen hall. Meanwhile, Drake was already assembling a team, realizing that if they managed to catch and sell the monster, they would be able to pay for tuition up to 3rd year. Seeing Solia, Drake began to ask if she would be willing to go along with them to increase the chances of catching the dragon monster. Han Shiha was sure that she would refuse because she had no problems with her studies, let alone paying for them. Therefore, he was honestly very surprised when he heard that Solia, whom he was confident in, had said that she would also go catch the dragon monster. Han Shiha remembered that in the original story, there was also a Drake squad, but he only gathered weak students in it. That said, in the original story, there was no Solia in Drake's squad, and eventually the squad disappeared completely. Left alone, Solia remembered her father's admonition to take her time and do everything according to the pure dictates of her heart. She realized that her confidence was gone as soon as Han Shiha overtook her in the previous exam. Solia knew that he had only beaten her once, but now she wasn't sure if she could regain her third place in Ardell Academy. That's why she joined the Monster Capture Squad to gain extra points and strengthen her position as a light mage. Solia made a promise to herself that she must capture the monster from the sample hall with her own hand to prove to everyone that she was a mage of light. Han Shiha turned to a clairvoyant who said that Solia would not be able to catch the dragon monster with her own hand. Going outside, he realized that Solia wouldn't be able to catch the monster alone, which meant she might just lose her life on this mission. The squad did go on the mission, and after a few minutes, there were already 2 casualties in the group, so they all wanted to go back. Dave didn't understand how the monster from the sample hall could be so clever and cautious, because it had managed to bypass all the traps they had set. Hugh Stenser was a 5th-year student in the dark magic department, and he was the one who controlled the actions of the dragon monster. He realized that the students were completely unaware that the dragon monster was in complete control, and he was amused by that. After the heavy blow, Solia was left all alone to move and didn't understand how she could prevail. Solia had absolutely no desire to just give up and accept her fate, so she gathered all her strength for a confrontation. However, at this moment, she was stopped by Han Shiha and told to save her strength because out of the true mages, she was all alone. Solia didn't understand how Han Shiha had ended up in the dungeon, but she listened to him carefully because he was a chance to win. Han Shiha immediately realized that the dragon was under control, so he threw the toy to distract the dragon from its master's edict. Hughes didn't understand why his monster dragon stopped obeying him and ran after incomprehensible objects in the other direction. Han Shiha understood that the basics of taming were that one must know the behavior of animals to be able to control them. Upon receiving the order, Solia immediately aimed a beam of light at the dragon monster to disarm it and deal damage. Hughes didn't understand how this could be possible because his connection to the monster had severed abruptly and he himself was now in danger. Solia and Han Shiha noticed that the monster had started to regain its strength again, and then they realized that it was dark magic. Han Shiha received a notification that his friendliness skill was forcibly increased, and he could now tame a dragon monster. Realizing that he had a chance to temporarily possess the monster from the sample hall, he realized that he had a chance to win. After that, he immediately tamed the monster and tamed it to confront its former master and emerge victorious. Solia didn't understand how such a thing was even possible, and Han Shiha said that he just managed to get along with animals. Hughes didn't want to give his monster to another master because he had spent too many years and efforts to tame it. Later, after receiving the report of what happened in the dungeon, Ernest put forward a punishment for all the members of the squad. Han Shiha, on the other hand, was rewarded and thanked by the PTA for saving their own children from the dragon monster. He also thought about the fact that he had gotten a tamer skill during the battle, and not a dark mage skill, which meant the story was really changing. The dragon monster had to be handed over to the teachers because Basilisk was adamantly opposed to a second dragon pet. Han Shiha also received a reward chest for completing the mission and decided to see what reward was inside. There was no limit to his joy when he discovered that he had been rewarded with a rank A artifact, a briefcase that could also be used in life. The system notified that inside the briefcase was an additional reward for keeping all students alive. Opening a piece of paper found at the bottom of the briefcase, Han Shiha realized that it was a math problem key to the problem Ernest had given him. Solving the problem with the help of a clue, he managed to get the numbers 205 and 014. Han Shiha immediately decided to go to the 205 Special Studies Auditorium and open the 14th locker. When Han Shiha opened it, he found another magic cube and was glad that everything had happened exactly as he had originally thought. After putting the cube in his briefcase, he went about his business, but he was immediately followed by Yoon Ha-yul, who asked him to go out with her. Han Shiha realized that Yoon Ha-yul just wanted to force him to participate in the astrology competition by any means necessary. Yoon Ha-yul said that if you win first place in the competition, you can get 3 credits for the next semester of study. Han Shiha thought about it, because if they could get the highest grade, he wouldn't have to go to Professor Grint's class for a whole semester. Yoon Ha also said that she was the best on her stream, so they should have won anyway, and they would even get a ride there. Han Shiha decided to agree and take part in the contest, wishing to be rewarded with an exemption from the lectures he wasn't interested in. All the following days, they spent days and nights reading astrology books to prepare well for the competition itself. When the day of the astrology competition came, Han Shiha and Yoon Ha-yul arrived at the appointed place and looked over the judges. Yunha was very surprised to see a judge who looked too much like Han Shi-ha himself. Han Shi-ha carefully looked at the member of the judging committee and realized that according to the story, it was his older brother, Han Shi-hyuk. He was very angry because he realized that if he had known about it, he would definitely not have taken part in this competition despite the awards. Han Shi-hyuk was always very neatly dressed, and his manners felt strict because he was from the magic department. Han Shi-ha realized that he was Count Han De-su's native son, but Han Shi-hyuk was an illegitimate son, so he didn't feel complete. Based on the story, Han Shi-ha always fought with his older brother as a child, and didn't accept him as his own brother. Han Shi-hyuk never trusted his younger brother because of the latter's fascination with dark magic and forbidden spells. Han Shi-ha looked at Yoon Ha-ul and hoped that Big Brother wouldn't purposely undergrade them. During the task, Han Shi-ha applied all his knowledge to not let Yoon Ha-ul down during the competition. While doing the practical assignment, he also tried very hard to make sure that everything went smoothly and they got high scores. During the judge's analysis, Han Shi-hyuk was very much surprised by the results of his younger brother, who had previously been able to do nothing at all. In analyzing the characteristics and personal cards of the participants, he found that Yoon Ha-ul was indeed an outstanding student in her department. When the results were tallied up, Yoon Ha-ul's team actually came in first place, which they were very happy about. A representative of the Department of Magic praised the kids for completing the task and presented the awards along with valuable prizes. When informed that a member from the judging committee would like to meet in person, Han Shi-ha became a little worried, realizing that it was his brother. In the waiting room, he tried to recall the story and realized that too little had been said about his brother to draw conclusion. Entering the room, Han Shi-hyuk said that he had invited him to give him advice not to try to jump above his head. Han Shi-ha realized that this wasn't all, and Han Shi-hyuk ordered him to stay at the Castic family estate for the duration of the vacation. Han Shi-hyuk didn't want to hear any objections and said that it was necessary to do so, and that he had no more questions because he had to leave. After going outside, Han Shi-ha realized that arguing with his brother was useless, and he thought that his older brother was probably very offended by him. A few days later, the final exams began, and Adela was very happy that she was able to pass all the exams successfully. She was surprised at the large number of suitcases, and Han Shi-ha explained that he had decided to return home for the vacation. Adela was very happy for Han Shi-ha, and said that since she wasn't welcome at home, she would stay at the dormitory for the vacation. Han Shi-ha looked at her and thought about the fact that the original story also didn't mention Adela's family, and she was always alone. He decided not to question Adela about it, and informed her that they would definitely see each other a month after the vacation. Upon arriving at the family estate, Han Shi-ha greeted the butler and informed him that he had arrived home for a vacation. However, the butler did not escort him inside, and informed him that the Count had given orders to wait for him at the entrance. Han Shi-ha was upset by this treatment of a child who hadn't been seen for a year, and decided to sit on the stairs at the entrance. After a long time, it was already evening outside, and the servants were actively discussing Han Shi-ha, thinking that it was better for him to find a place to sleep. Han Shi-ha, along with Basilisk, continued to wait patiently until they were finally invited inside. Suddenly, the door opened, and Count Han De-su walked out onto the stairs and invited Han Shi-ha to enter the house. Once inside, Han Shi-ha realized why he was treated like this because his father only knew that he was being prosecuted. Therefore, he reported that most likely the rumors inside the castle were spreading too slowly. Catching the behavior of the servants and attendants, Han Shi-ha realized who exactly was the source of the rumor spreading. Afterward, Han Shi-ha asked why his father was completely uninterested and why he personally went to the magic department. Count Han De-su began to get extremely angry and his eyes immediately began to shimmer red with rage. Han Shi-ha decided to soften the situation and asked the servant to give his father the report card to prove that he had changed his attitude toward his studies. When Han De-su read the report, he thought that it was all a hoax because he was ranked first in all practical tasks, but the overall ranking was third. Han Shi-ha reported that he did not do anything wrong, and the report card is mostly grades for practical assignments that are difficult to fake. Suddenly, Count Han De-su clutched the statement in his hands, and tears of joy appeared in his eyes that his son had taken up the task. Han De-su looked at his youngest son and said that now he was really very proud of him. After this incident, the attitude of all the servants changed greatly, and now they bowed their heads when Han Shi-ha walked down the hall. A few days later, Han De-su asked his youngest son during tea time what he would like to do during the vacation. Shiha said that he would really like to learn horseback riding because he didn't have that opportunity at the Ardell Academy. He also asked for gemstone powder to be prepared because that was what the Terra cub was to be fed after hatching. Shiha realized that Terra was a very strong and peculiar dragon, so it would not be easy to tame him. After a few days, the cub was born and had a lot of magical power, so Shiha had to put it into a dream state. Shiha tried hard and realized that to tame Terra, he would have to try and do everything slowly and gradually. To begin with, he would put the dragon to sleep to get it used to its new surroundings and the scent of its master. Shiha was glad that it was vacation time, which meant he had plenty of time to tame such a serious monster. When Shiha returned from his vacation, everyone was surprised that he was able to tame such a willful monster as Pteru. Shiha asked one not to distract him too much because today, they had to sign up for next semester's subject. Vaughn provided his fellow man with a carefully thought out and organized schedule with free hours to practice. Shiha was very grateful to him for a job so well done, and one was glad he could be of service. Registering students for courses was a fairly serious procedure and took place in the Magic Center. Shiha tried to get everything ready for the day of registration for the subjects because he didn't want to meet with Professor Grint. Once the registration process began with access to the Magic Center, all students tried to select items, but the start pages did not load well. Shiha, remembering the speed skills of his past life, tried very hard to do everything quickly and clearly to select the right item. Vaughn wasn't very happy because he had made a few mistakes and would still have to go to Professor Grint's boring lectures. Shiha was very happy because he had managed to collect and make himself a perfect schedule of required subjects and practical classes. The students didn't understand how Shiha managed to enroll in all the courses while excluding the ones he didn't plan to take. Shiha thought about how the experience of signing up for a schedule at the computer club when he was a student really came in handy for him. However, when he returned to the academy, there was once again preparing a provocation by the dark mages against him, so he tried to be ready for the battle. Thanks to the fact that he was surrounded by strong mages like Lee Hansolia and Adele, they managed to settle things fairly quickly. Coming afterward to the first basic flying class, Shiha was horrified because the professor dictating the lectures was Grint Beutler. Shiha was very upset about the professor's change because he had made too much effort to avoid meeting him. After a while, the students were sent to the campground, along with those who were already finishing their second year at Ardell Academy. According to the idea of the teachers, the third course was to share their experience and knowledge with the second course when interacting during assignments and recreation. However, in practice, the third-year student Hassan informed that the students must give up their food supplies and obey and fulfill all his orders. Adela didn't understand how they could give away all the food and water since they were in the mountains, and then they would have absolutely nothing to eat. Hassan yelled at Adela and informed them that they would have to do what he said, and ordered them to start passing food and useful supplies. Seeing that the students started passing the supplies, Hassan was very happy and asked them to hurry up, otherwise they would not give them good marks for their work. Passing by Shiha, Hassan noticed that he was the only one who hadn't even begun to inspect his supplies. Shiha began to sneer at Hassan, saying that they were nothing more than a common joke to him, and he had no plans to follow their orders. Hassan thought he must have misheard, but then he realized it was Shiha, the one they were always talking about on the academy ground. He started laughing, thinking that Shiha was only so confident because his father was an earl who would have helped him anyway. Shiha reported that Dean Ernest had invited him to visit him before the hike and informed him that the most important thing during the hike is team spirit. Hassan was very angry and wanted to hit Shiha, but at that moment, a basilisk flew out and bit his opponent's arm. Hassan began to examine his arm and asked for a doctor to get help immediately because there were scratches and abrasions on his arm made by the monster. When he went to get medical help, Hassan said that if he was found to have something serious, he would not just leave the situation like that. Shiha said he wasn't afraid of it at all, and asked the other disciples to take their food and return to their tents. Hassan's comrade didn't understand why he had started arguing with Shiha, because his ability had developed too fast among the other disciples. Hassan was furious and started searching among the luggage of the sophomores for Shiha's luggage bag to take revenge on him. He immediately took out all the water bottles from the students' backpacks so that they would still suffer a little for Shiha's action. After hiking for 6 days, the team found only 1 bottle of water, and Solia decided not to give up, believing that a way out could be found. They often had to choose which way to go, and Han Shiha confidently said which way to turn because the professor had given him a map earlier. Hassan had accidentally pulled a stone locator out of Han Shiha squad's backpack, and no one could track their location. The location stone was a minimum defense device, and now the third year couldn't find the second year team. Hassan was very nervous because he and Ravenna might be punished if the students couldn't find their way back to the camp without water and food. Han Shiha and Adela, meanwhile, noticed the suspiciousness of the similarities in the landscape, as if someone had used illusion magic against them. Solia saw a cave ahead and said that they might have gotten out of the illusion magic's range and might be able to spend the night inside. However, a large boar-shaped monster came out of the cave to meet them and was very aggressive. Vaughn and Adela immediately noticed that the monster was very angry that they had dared to enter its habitat. Han Shiha realized that there was a big boar in front of them from the looks of it, so he immediately dispatched the basilisk to catch it. He was sure that the basilisk as a legendary level monster could handle it, but the boar was much stronger than they had anticipated. Seeing that basilisk had lost, Adela immediately bared her sword to show the monster her power and protect the boys. However, the sword didn't even leave a scratch on the monster's body, and Vaughn realized that it was wearing a magical reinforcement. As soon as the basilisk came to his senses, Han Shiha decided to try with him the fire spark technique they had practiced for a long time. The boar did indeed faint from the mighty force, and Vaughn was surprised that such a small dragon was capable of such a powerful blow. Han Shiha was very happy that they had managed to win and took care of their dinner of delicious roast pork. Since he was the only one with much knowledge of anatomy, all the dirty work had to be done by him while the boys gathered firewood. Basilisk helped the team members with building a fire so it was much warmer, and all that was left was to cook the meat for dinner. Having finished cooking the kebab, all the guys were very happy because for a whole day without food, their strength was running out. While the boys were eating and warming themselves by the fire, Han Shiha decided to check the cave and think about what they should do and where to go next. His thoughts were interrupted by Adela, who couldn't sleep, and decided to ask Han Shiha what he was thinking about so intently. Pointing to a clear sky with lots of stars, she suggested we take a little walk under the night sky. Adele wondered why Han Shiha chose taming, and he replied that he liked to get something without putting in any effort. Adela smiled and said that magic finds whoever truly desires it, so it is the law of any world. She confessed that she knew from birth that she would become a mage because one morning, her entire village and its inhabitants were left underground. Adela told me that everything happened in one morning, and she was left all alone with the desire to become a mage and change the world by cleansing it of evil. Han Shiha wanted to support Adela, but suddenly, strange hieroglyphics began to appear on the floor of the cave under their feet. Afterward, there was a small earthquake, and Adela and Han Shiha didn't realize what was happening. They remembered that the hieroglyphs were very similar to those they had seen in the note they had found during the battle with the Dark Magician. Looking around, they saw a magic cube that was hidden inside one of the walls. When Adela saw the big stone golem, she grabbed Han Shiha and told him that they had no choice but to escape from the cave or they would stay in it. At one point, they had to stop because the cave started to narrow and the two of them hit their heads hard. When she saw Natalie and Vaughn, Adela was very happy and said that they had to run away and had no time to explain anything. Stopping at the entrance to the cave, Vaughn said that there was nowhere else for them to run to because the illusion magic was working next and they would be going in circles. Adela realized that they had no option left but to try and confront the huge stone golem. After a little thought, she turned around and used the stone rain spell to damage the golem. Seeing that such a strong attack didn't work, Han Shiha realized that the basilisk's strength wouldn't help either, so he turned to Natalie. He asked her to create a big wave, since she was a water mage, and trust him to be able to launch an attack on the monster. Once the golem was covered in water, Han Shiha released Closty, who immediately froze the golem and turned all the stones into ice. After that, he was just smashed and the golem lost, and Adela said that Han Shiha really came up with a brilliant plan. Suddenly, Han Shiha fell to the ground, because he had used too much mana and had absolutely no strength left. At this point, Hassan and Raven were finally able to locate the second-year students and looked around asking what had even happened. Hassan immediately admitted that the whole thing was entirely his fault, and he hadn't left them without water supplies and communication equipment on purpose. Han Shiha was furious, realizing that they could be in big trouble, and ordered Hassan to kneel down and beg their forgiveness. Hassan realized that everything that had happened was entirely his fault, so he knelt down and apologized. Since the golem magic was too strong, the academy immediately evacuated all the students early for safety reasons. Back at the dormitory, Han Shiha informed Li Han of everything that had happened and said that he had managed to find the second magic cube. Afterwards, the students began to discuss the area of effective illusion magic and realized that it could not be set remotely. Then Adela realized that the person who had set this spell was somewhere in the forest and was watching them. Han Shiha realized that the magic cube and their own lives were in danger because the dark magicians were already following them. According to the main storyline, their main opponent was supposed to be the dark mage Argent, who was part-time the best thief. Han Shiha told the guys that he wanted a rest because he actually needed to assemble a 5-man team for the confrontation. He realized that the original team consisted of Solia, Adela, Li Han 1, and Natalie. However, they were unable to resist the dark magician. Han Shiha immediately thought of Yoon Hae-yul, who was the best in the clairvoyance department and had held her position for a long time. The second candidate he introduced was Seymour Parker, who really hadn't resorted to dark magic after what had happened. Han Shiha realized that going against the main scenario would not be easy, but on the other hand, his own life security was also at stake. He decided to trust his feelings and act according to the plan to save the world from the hands of the Order of Dark Mages. Before assembling the team, he decided to check the status of the magic cubes that had been given to Li Han and hidden in the desert in a small cave. Han Shiha was scrutinizing the cubes because they had managed to find as many as 3 magic cubes during this time. The magic cube was a small vessel with an inexhaustible supply of mana and the necessary power. Han Shiha realized that in the original story, one had to pay with their eyesight to use the cubes, and he wanted to find another way to use them. Therefore, he decided to use his taming skills to subdue the power of the cube to himself and use it freely. Han Shiha tried to speak to the cube in order to establish a dialogue, and through communication subdue it. Realizing that the cube was completely unresponsive, Han Shiha decided to give the cube's name to increase their level of trust. Calling it a square, the system notified them that they had indeed begun to increase their level of intimacy with the magical stone in question. After a little while, the system confirmed the square's domestication as a pet with a strength of 100 and an intelligence of 1. Han Shiha was very happy that his idea was feasible, and he continued to tame the magic cube. After taming the first cube, Han Shiha began to tame the second magic cube, but the speed was much slower. By taming the cubes, he learned that each one has a certain power, such as the void, which can create spaces out of mana. Han Shiha realized that he had previously thought that cubes were just vessels of energy, but it turned out that each of them could be used in other ways as well. Basilisk was also trying to learn new skills, and was now able to change his color, though he planned to learn how to change his shape as well. Then Han Shiha asked Basilisk to try using this skill on the magic cube to change its shape and not attract attention. Basilisk was curious to try out his new skill, so he was immediately able to change the shape of the cube to a ball shape. After Han Shiha started to assemble a team, but Yoon Hae-yul didn't really want to join the team because she saw a bad omen. Seymour, however, accepted the invitation without hesitation because he hoped in this way to correct the mistakes of the past. After a while, Han Shiha was reading a book sitting on a bench, and Natalie came up to him holding a cat in her arm. Natalie reported that she found him soaked and hungry outside the house and just couldn't get past him. The cat immediately jumped into Han Shiha's arms, and Natalie was very surprised because it took her several days to tame the cat. Natalie noticed the book Han Shiha was reading because it was very difficult and decided to help him read it. She said she knows a lot of information about artifacts and their classification because she once even made her own broom with her dad. When he reached the information about magic cubes, Han Shiha was very surprised that Natalie knew the information about them as well. Natalie was even more surprised that Han Shiha knew about the cubes because their creator was her grandfather and only rare people knew about them. Han Shiha didn't know what to say to Natalie, but he knew she was a minor character, so he decided to tell her the truth. He told Natalie that he only knew about the magic cubes because he had them and had to protect them. Natalie was very surprised and was told by her grandfather that the cubes were missing, and therefore no one should be told about them. Han Shiha realized that there was no point in hiding information from her, so he decided to tell her the whole truth and invite her to his team. Natalie happily accepted the invitation to join the team to confront the dark mages and protect the magic. She said that her grandfather planned to create a magical diesel locomotive and so used cubes as a perpetual motion machine. Natalie's grandfather traveled the continents to find crystals that could be filled with more mana. Natalie reported that since different minerals were used for the cubes, the abilities of each cube were completely different. Han Shiha realized that the magic cubes were originally created to make people's work easier, but the dark magicians found another use for them. He was very happy to have met Natalie, who helped him gain so much valuable information about the origin of the cube. As soon as he said goodbye to Natalie and walked down the hallway towards his room, he was called out by Yul, who ran after him. Yul was surprised to see the cat in Han Shiha's hands, and he explained that Natalie found it and asked him to look after it. She immediately asked to let her hold the cat in her arms, and Han Shiha warned her that Natalie had been trying to get close to him for a few days. Han Shiha was surprised that the cat didn't hiss at all, and immediately calmed down in her arms, so he offered to take the cat home. Yul was very happy to have a pet, and she immediately named the cat Joy to get him used to his nickname. Han Shiha asked why she was looking for him, and Yunha said that she found out that Han Shi-hyuk had been hired as a new teacher. Han Shiha was very surprised that his older brother from the magic department decided to take a job as a teacher. When he got home, he was told the same thing by Adela, who told him that Han Shi-hyuk would continue to work in the Department of Magic. He didn't understand where Adela got so much information from, and she informed him that she had taken a job with a new teacher to work as an assistant. Han Shiha didn't understand why Adela hadn't informed him that his older brother would be the new teacher, and she would be his assistant. Adela said she thought he already knew everything, plus she didn't have to tell him all the details of her personal life. Han Shiha didn't understand why he was so hurt that Adela hadn't told him about it, and decided not to emphasize it. Suddenly, Han Shiha received a system notification that he should help his older brother solve the Cataflam case. Han Shihek is the best predictor of the Ardal Empire, but he has decided to apply his skills to change the paradigm of the time cycle. So, thanks to predictions, he managed to get an important place in the Department of Magic and become an investigator, but this case did not lend itself to him. Han Shi-hyuk recalled that he had seen a vision of the Cataflam case when he was still a child, so he couldn't pass it up. He took a job teaching at the academy so that the ministry wouldn't monitor him so closely and he could investigate more freely. Han Shiha reasoned over the system notice because he was mainly supposed to confront the dark magician rather than help with the investigation. He realized that in the original Catafalm was Adela's home village at the hands of whom he had lost his life afterward. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the students who informed him that Han Shi-hyuk was urgently summoning him to his office. Han Shi-hyuk informed his younger brother that he must go as a guest to the royal banquet to get information. Han Shiha was puzzled and asked to at least explain everything, and Big Brother said it was part of his investigation. After reading the small amount of case files, he realized that attending the banquet would indeed be part of the investigation. Han Shi-hyuk explained that he is too famous to come to the banquet and ask about the events of 10 years ago. Han Shiha realized that he really wouldn't be suspected because to everyone, he is an inexperienced mage who is just a second-year student. Han Shi-hyuk warned that there would be a lot of noble guests at the royal ball, so you should be careful and attentive. A few days later, the royal banquet came, and Han Shiha stepping inside felt like he was inside a fairy tale world. He was surprised at the large amount of different foods on the tables, including even chocolate fountains and berry kebabs. Unexpectedly, he saw Professor Bruce Miller among the guests and decided to take advantage of the situation to get information. The professor was surprised at such a student event, so he decided to ask what exactly brought him to the royal ball. When Han Shiha explained that he was an assistant investigator on the Catafalm case, the professor said he hadn't heard of such a thing. Bruce Miller decided to clarify how close Han Shiha's relationship with the investigator is, and he replied that he just respects him as a person. The professor advised Han Shiha not to trust the investigator too much, because soothsayers have their dark side. Han Shiha was very surprised at this kind of parting advice, but decided to thank the professor for saying so. He began to scrutinize the people who were at the event to see who best to go to for information. Suddenly, he was called out by a girl with aristocratic looks, who asked if the young boy was bored at such an event. However, when he turned around, the girl immediately called him by his name, which surprised Han Shiha even more. Han Shiha carefully looked at the girl's face but couldn't remember her at all, and she immediately recognized him as Count Hantasu's son. When the lady clarified whether he had come to the event with his brother Han Shiha, realized that the lady was close to his family and knew a lot. Han Shiha said he came to the event with his brother to help him with the Catafalm investigation. Mistress's face changed dramatically, and she even took a few steps back from the confusion, not knowing what exactly to answer. Han Shiha immediately realized that his human instinct had not failed, and he had indeed found someone who had some information. The lady answered that she did not know how to answer his question, and decided to clarify the information from him first. Leaning in, She asked who the Empire would choose if either one student or 1,000 people could be saved. Shiha started to feel a little nervous because he didn't understand why Madam had even decided to ask him such a question. Madam decided to rephrase her question and asked who the Empire would choose if it was possible to save his one thing at the cost of the lives of thousands of ordinary people. Shiha replied that he would save 1,000 ordinary people because they could work and farm the land, bringing income to the Empire. He explained that the cost of his life could not be compared to the cost of the lives of so many people. The lady smiled and replied that if her life or 10,000 ordinary people were at stake, the Empire would save her alone. Shiha began to realize what Madam was getting at, because in the village case, about 1,000 people had also disappeared. Mistress said that sometimes the life of one person who can stand up to a dark mage is worth more than all the others. Shiha said he couldn't even evaluate his life more important than the lives of 1,000 other people like that, and didn't understand why Madam was so calm. Their conversation was interrupted by the Countess's servant, who took off her hat and said that she had had quite an interesting conversation which had come to an end. When Shiha realized that he had spoken very rudely to the great empress who ruled the entire empire, he felt very ashamed. The Grand Empress smiled and decided to ask again one more time, won her life or the lives of hundreds of thousands of ordinary people. Shiha was already sitting on the sofa, along with Hyuk, who was holding his head, realizing that his brother had done something wrong again. The Empress laughed and asked Shiha to help her decide whether to take away his arm or leg. Shiha tried to behave with restraint, but inside he was in a storm because he really wanted to just be spared. He remembered that Empress Rinia was very rude and always got what she wanted absolutely at any cost. Hyuk appealed to the Empress and asked her to pardon his younger brother, who was just a child. Shiha was very surprised that his elder brother sided with him and didn't fear the madam to ask for his mercy. Rinia was surprised at such a question and decided to clarify exactly what he meant by the concept of the word spare him. However, to everyone's surprise, Hyuk asked the Grand Empress to take his brother's life quickly and painlessly. The Grand Empress laughed and said that so far she was even amused by the rudeness of the young man, so she asked the servant to bring the hourglass. Then she turned over the clock and announced that she was giving Shiha exactly 3 minutes for him to convince her of the value of his existence. Shiha asked Madame not to interrupt him and said that he was a very intelligent and talented person that the Empire needed. He said he was smart enough to have realized a lot about the Catafalm investigation in a few seconds of their conversation. Great Empress Rinia even became curious, so she decided to listen to the young man and his version to the very end. Shiha said that the residents of that village who disappeared without a trace might have lived if she herself hadn't ordered them buried in the ground. Hyuk was horrified, not understanding what his younger brother was talking about in front of the Grand Empress. Shiha said that for the time being, he only had to understand what personal goal Madam had in mind to do this to. He realized that the Empress had not done this with her own hands and therefore had used the services of one of the 5 Counts. Realizing that the most influential of them was his father, Han Tae-soo, he decided to ask Rinia directly about who exactly did it. Grand Empress Rinia, maintaining complete calmness, smiled and asked how he knew about it. After finishing his monologue, Shiha said that he had spoken to her for no more than 5 minutes and was able to get so much information, which meant that the Empire could use him. Without letting Madam say a word, Shiha said that he would be able to discover even more new things after another 5 minutes. Grand Empress Rinia started laughing at the top of her voice and said that she would keep him alive now because she really liked his straightforwardness. As a reward, she handed Hyuk an envelope with valuable information that was kept secret in the Department of Magic. Hyuk thanked the lady for such a valuable gift and promised that only he would read the case files personally. Shiha opened the box with a gift from the Empress and saw a very beautiful fountain pen inside. Grand Empress Rinia smiled again and asked how Shiha thought why she chose to give him the pen. Shiha assumed that the pen was an artifact and realized that it would most likely be useful to him in catching dark magicians. The next day, Count Hantasu asked why the Grand Empress praised his youngest son so much. Shiha replied that he was helping his brother in investigating the case, and when he insulted a lady, he didn't know she was the Empress. Hantasu was horrified at such news and later calmed down a bit, realizing that his youngest son's head was still on his shoulder. Meanwhile, Hyuk decided to read the case file that said that the Dark Mage Nox was hiding in the village. The Empire could not find out the Dark Magician, so it decided to completely deprive all villagers of life. Hyuk didn't like everything he read, but the text said that there were two surviving children among all the inhabitants. One of them was Adela Stavia, who volunteered to work as his assistant on the case. Aeon Shi-hyuk realized that she was alone and had lost everything, so when she learned the truth, she would want to take revenge on the Empire and Han Ta-soo. Han Ta-soo confessed to Han Shi-ha that a clairvoyant had come to him that day and told him that the survivor would take his son's life. The Count admitted that after this prediction, he could not trust anyone else with the case and wanted to do everything himself to make sure of everything. That day, however, he saw only one child sitting on the ground crying bitterly, and the Count could do no other than take him in. Han Ta-soo felt sorry for the child, so he wiped his memory and decided to raise him as a son to always control the situation. Han Shi-ha realized that his older brother wasn't really his brother at all, and moreover, had to take his life with his own hand. Then, after thinking for a while, Han Shi-ha asked if his father regretted what he had done that day in that village. Han Ta-soo replied that he regretted not taking the lives of the last two surviving children, who might later take his son's life. Han Shi-ha was horrified and didn't understand how his father could treat human lives like this and act like this by taking away 1,000 people. Count Han Ta-soo replied that if he had the opportunity to change the past, he would do the same to save his son in the future. Then he took the Sword of Earth Waves out of the closet and handed it to his son because it was this sword that had destroyed Cataphom 10 years ago. Han Shi-ha didn't understand what it was for, and his father said that it was a sword of despair and that he might need it someday. Count Han Ta-soo asked Han Shi-ha to stay as far away from Adela and Han Shi-hyuk as possible during his life. After receiving the sword, Han Shi-ha began to hesitate because he realized that Han Shi-hyuk had also learned everything from the documents he received from Rinya. The problem was Adela, who knew absolutely nothing, and he didn't realize whether he should tell her the whole truth or not. Han Shi-ha realized that she wasn't ready to hear that her family had lost their lives for the good of the Empire, which meant that he would have to lie to her constantly. After taking the Earthwave sword, he went to the dormitory and hung it in the closet so that the sword wouldn't get dirty and lose its power. Han Shi-ha realized that this sword could destroy the entire dormitory due to desperation, so he needed to control his emotions. One entered the room and was very happy that Han Shi-ha had returned, because he had heard that he had been urgently summoned by his parents at the manor. Adela also gave him a note saying that she missed Vasilisis and asked him to come to the dormitory in the evening to meet her. They did meet outside the dormitory in the evening, and Adela stroked Vasilisk and asked if he could spend the evening with her. Han Shi-ha was very much surprised that Adela had invited him to attend the Sakura Blossom Festival in a nearby public garden. Adela admired the garden and said that last year she was not able to attend this exhibition because she was very busy with training. Han Shi-ha was very surprised that Adela liked such trees because he thought she was more aggressive. On the other hand, he was very surprised that she actually looked very nice, and the flowers that were around her suited her. When Han Shi-ha realized that he thought Adela was cute enough, he immediately began to slap his cheeks, realizing that his thoughts were completely wrong. Adela said that there is a belief that if you catch a sakura petal and make a wish, it will come true. Han Shi-ha wondered how he could control his emotions because he really wanted to tell Adela the truth, but she wasn't ready for it. Watching Adela, he realized that she was just a child and would not be able to understand that her family had been robbed of their lives by her friend's father. Han Shi-ha realized that he and Adela originally had a trusting relationship, and he still couldn't do otherwise. His thoughts were interrupted by Adela, who said that she had managed to catch a petal and make her secret wish. Han Shi-ha lowered his head down and realized that he still had to confess something to her, because he didn't want to become her enemy.